Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm here to read a comic. And today's comic is World's Finest Comics, issue number 233, dated October 1975. This is a comic I actually do remember buying off the newsstand. It was definitely the cover that attracted me, and this is a fun read. I found it to be a fun read back then. I find it to be a fun read today. I find it to be a fun read for different reasons. The reasons why I find this comic to be a fun read now were completely over my head in 1975 when I was 8. It's somewhat, the cover is somewhat disingenuous in that this is sold to us as a Superman and Batman team up, when in actuality, it's a team up with the Super Sons. I never figured out their individual monikers. I knew they were always known as the Sons, the Super Sons, but I didn't know whether it was Batman Jr. or Superman Jr. or any other variation. That's neither here nor there. It is a Super Son story. These are imaginary stories. So whenever these stories appeared, they actually never affected the DC universe continuality. Although this was written by Bob Hanley, who completely ignored whatever else was going on in the DC universe. So regardless of whether this is an imaginary story or not, Bob Hanley, they might as well have not been. This story, again, lots of fun. Another thing with Bob Hanley is that there is a whole lot of sexism in this story. And Bob is just unleashing it. I think in Bob's mind, he must have been thinking that, he was enlightening the younger readers on how male-female relationships should be. Bob, even though this story was written in 1975, Bob is very much a creature of 1953. And his attitude toward women and politics and all that, it kind of shows in this issue here. Same way I'm going to describe the cover. The one thing that stands out is the colors. It's really nicely colored. We see that there's a large kind of sloth-like creature with a huge eye that's kind of centering the cover here. And in one of its tentacles, it's holding Batman, and an unconscious Batman Jr., as there are three women aiming their rifles at him. And the sloth creature is kind of making an ultimatum to Superman Jr. here, that surrender, or I command my females to kill your friend. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, and we're told that this is a world without men, which is like, this is Bob Hanley like warning the younger readers. You got to keep up the mantle of manhood here. So anyway, I'm going to go into the story. And I'm going to take a look at the splash page. Following largely the DC formula, the splash page is kind of like a kind of a retelling of what the story is going to be. It's kind of like a little prologue. This differed from Marvel. Marvel just went into the story right from the splash page. And that's something I think Kirby did when he was in DC. But most of the other DC creators, they sort of followed this formula here. And the formula, we could see a lot of it here. We see kind of these ghostly images of Superman and Batman. And in this particular imaginary universe where the Super Sons exist, Batman and Robin, Superman and Batman are very much absentee fathers. They really honestly don't want to have too much to do with these two sons, even though they don't seem to have any animosity toward them. So it's like neither one of them is like a burden to the dads, particularly Bruce with his bank account. But nevertheless, there's sort of this feeling where the adults really didn't want to bother with the kids. But that's actually kind of sold to us here as Batman is giving out a warning that's unheeded, or actually unheard by our two protagonists, Clark Jr. and Bruce Jr. But Superman is saying, hey, listen, they're kids, they have to learn, and this will be a great teaching moment for them. And that's sort of how it worked out. I think there's One's World's Finest, and I'll kind of look at that at some point, where the fathers and the sons, they actually have this Iron John moment where they're at this retreat, and it's kind of a fun story. But this is a fun story for a different reason. World Without Men, we'll take a look at the creative team, and the artist is by, the artists are Dick Dillon, who's kind of a long time DC mainstay. He was fine. He was adequate. Middle of the road art. It wasn't bad. It was something I grew up reading, but it wasn't spectacular either. I think if I had to figure out a Marvel equivalent to Dick Dillon, probably be George Tuska. Because Dick Dillon's is kind of like has a similar style, even though it's closer to more like Irv Novak. And Irv, better artist, I have to say. He was sort of like the DC in-house guy. That was the style DC wanted to capture for most of their superhero comic books in the mid-'70s. And the story, of course, is by Bob Hanley. And Bob makes his presence known. So anyway, we're going to go into the story. Superman, Batman, they're kind of discussing what's going to go on with their sons in whatever limbo they're in. And we see the two super sons here. And apparently they're traveling around America in sort of this, I guess this mystery machine type of van here. I mean, I don't know if there were any Scooby snacks or any of that stuff in there. There's definitely not any hot chicks in there. So we don't see a Daphne. But nevertheless, they're traveling around the country. It looks like they're in the South. And currently they're crossing this body of water on a kind of like a small little ferry here. And this is going to lead them to their destination, which is the state capital. And we're told here by a sign it's 32 miles away. However, the two sons, they see another sign for a town called Belton, which is only 16 miles away. Now, according to the story, the Super Sons are in no rush to go to their destination. They're just simply traveling around. So they sort of make this impulsive decision to go to Belton. Why? Why not? They have time on their hands. So they make that decision. The ferryman, he's warning them about going, but he's not telling them in a very serious way. Kind of like in a you go there, you're going to be gone. And I'm going to have a good laugh when that happens to you. And so the Super Sons, particularly Bruce, kind of takes this as a dare. And we see that Bruce here, as they drive off in the start of part 1, Bruce is the type who will kind of take a dare. So he's going to go to Belton simply to kind of show up this ferryman here. But, again, they've been warned. They were warned. And so they're driving directly to Belton, the town of Belton. Bruce is particularly up for this. Like I said, he saw this as a complete dare. And he can't resist it. We see that in the van, they do have their costumes. They have the costumes out. So they're not even like folded. They're just simply on hangers here. which is what you would expect from kind of college-age kids. I don't know if the ages were determined, but I would probably put them at 21. Okay, so they're driving. One thing they're noticing is that there are a lot of signs with a single eye. And the two sons, they're mentioning the two super sons. I gotta call them something. They're mentioning that they've seen this type of, I guess, advertisement, and they figure it's for eye makeup. That's probably like kind of like this avant-garde advertising ad. So a few miles down the road, they run into a blacksmith, which 1975, I'm from New York, so we don't really have blacksmiths, but I'm sure that there were some that were probably still employed in the mid-70s. Now they hear a great deal of noise and racket coming from the blacksmith shop here, which would be understandable given what a blacksmith does. Now, there's some Bob Hanley sexism coming up here. Now, the thing is, they're hearing the sounds, they're seeing the light of the furnace from the windows, and they're assuming that there is a blacksmith working there, and that it's a guy, and they're saying, man, that guy is really working hard, he's really pounding hard. So they already made a prejudgment. So then they walk into the blacksmith shop, and then they see this beautiful young woman who is the blacksmith. And I would say that she kind of looks like maybe a little like Diane Lane. If you remember Diane Lane from the 1980s, she kind of looks a little like her. So this is the blacksmith. It's a very beautiful woman. The only thing I have an issue with is that she's not protecting her face, her arms, or her legs. But nevertheless, the two super sons, they go in and they notice this very beautiful young woman. Here's where the sexism shows up. Clark Jr. says, hey, let me help you. Now, they didn't have any doubts that the blacksmith in the shop was competent, because what they heard and what they saw from outside, sight unseen, sounded everything was fine. The moment that Clark Jr. saw that this was a woman, he's immediately thinking DEI hire. She can't possibly know what she's doing. So let me help this woman who is in this occupation. And again, just because she's a woman, Clark is like, hey, are you sure you know what you're doing? So that's kind of a little bit of Bob Hanley sexism. It gets a little bit more blatant as we go into the story. The woman's very angry at Clark Jr. She should be. It's kind of insulting here that she doesn't know her job. But she's really, really upset. She's taking the red-hot iron bar that she's working on, and she just puts it right into Clark's face, making it clear that, she doesn't want, either one of these guys touching her or touching her work. And the Super Sons, they're surprised by the amount of hostility here. Clark's making the point that if his eye tissue wasn't, quote, enhanced with, say, Kryptonian DNA, because Clark Jr. is half Kryptonian. He has his mom's an Earthling. At this point, we don't know who the moms are. So, and because of this, Clark Jr. only has half the strength of his father, which is still considerable, but it's still half the strength. So they're kind of making the point that Clark Jr. isn't completely invulnerable, so that might have hurt him. And Bruce is kind of getting the point, because he definitely would have been hurt, saying, listen, let's get the hell out of here, and maybe we'll find some friendlier people. So after a little bit of time, the Super Sons, they show up in the town of Belton. And what they see is a town populated entirely, really, only by females. There's only women around, and they're all very attractive females. Again, comic book artists at this time, they knew the value of drawing attractive women, because that will get you work on Madison Avenue. So anyway, the Super Sons, they're kind of enjoying the view of the town, which is basically them leering at the women here as they're going about their business. And they're making it clear, sort of the asexuality that kind of followed Superman and Batman. It's not following the Super Sons. Super Sons are completely admitting that they're about to stroke it here, because they're really enjoying this. But as the two are kind of having this banter with each other. By the way, the artist, it's really hard to tell who's Bruce and who's Clark. It's really the glasses that are telling me, because they look so much alike here. So anyway, as they're going through their banter, a police officer stops them mid-banter, and she's writing out a ticket for some parking violation that had happened with the Super Sons. It's going to be a $500 ticket, which in 1975 was way more than $500. And this is obviously a kind of a play on those speed traps. A lot of small southern towns and counties, kind of like the fictional Dukes County, or what was it? Was it Hazard County? It was Hazard County in the Dukes of Hazzard. They're famous for kind of like these speed traps, and then you see Roscoe writing out 50 tickets a day, and that's how the town generated money, or Boss Hogg did. So anyway, as this very attractive blonde police officer is writing out a ticket, the Super Sons, they're kind of giving a little resistance, saying this is much too extreme, and they're still being sexist, because I'm not one for you have to kiss a police officer's ass, but at the same time, here's Bruce saying, "Listen, beautiful, can't we work this out?" I mean, she's still a official law enforcement person. I'm sorry, the gummies are kicking in. And this is not the way you should talk to a woman, in this profession. Now, later on we find out she's mind controlled, but at this point we don't. So, she's just being professional here. It turns out the mayor has shown up. Oh, we're at least given a name for the officer, because she does work herself into the story later on. She's Officer Diane. So she's like the head law enforcement official. And the woman here is Sarah, and she's the town's mayor here. I would say kind of Officer Diane kind of gives maybe a, I don't want to say Goldie Hawn, maybe kind of a civil shepherd, kind of like a Farrah Fawcett kind of feel here, particularly the hair. The mayor, who actually has some kind of muscular forearms here, is, I would say she has brown hair. She kind of has a, I can't think of anyone here. But she's still an attractive woman, though. So anyway, Bruce is kind of arguing about the parking ticket, saying that this is basically kind of like illegal and you're running a scam. And as Bruce kind of reaches out to the mayor, Sarah, she recoils from his touch. I would say maybe the mayor kind of has a Linda Gray from Dallas, that kind of look. So anyway, then we get into some of Bob Hanley's feelings about how he thinks feminists are. Sarah's saying to Clark, Men. Men have few rights in Belton. Big Sister has shown us our female rights to live in dignity without males dominating us. So, so again, Bob Hanley had these ideas that whenever a woman kind of questioned the patriarchy or sort of the double standard, the way men are treated, women are treated, he got very defensive. And it goes back to the whole thing where, like, you know, these are these masculine, angry women who can't get a man, and then they want to take it out on all men. So that's how guys like Bob thought. So anyway, Bruce, he's still trying to put on a charm offense here, and he's kind of being a jerk off. He's calling her baby, like, you know, she's like he's butthead or something, and he's talking about real heavy women's lib stuff. But baby, without men, how will you have lovers? Yeah, they can figure out how to do that. Husbands, families. Well, okay, the other two, you may need some male assistance. So anyway, Sarah is talking about Big Sister Sybil, and that we find out that that's the evil villain in this story. But Sarah's saying, Big Sister Sybil has promised that when men change their domineering ways, we shall allow them to touch us again. And that's like, you know, Bob Hanley getting angry that women, how dare women turn, you know, men down, or they have some say. So I'm going to take a look at this comic book ad. It's for Slim Jim. I remember having a couple of Slim Jims. They were fine. Not my thing. It was really strange how the company thought that comic book readers really wanted spicy meat that was going to give them upset stomach. But then again, I think they got their advertising right when they did those commercials with Randy Macho Man. See, another ad for a comic book binder. I actually knew a kid who had this, and it was great. He had comics from like the kind of like the mid to late 60s. This is back in 75, so this is not. It was much harder to get older comics back then. Okay, so we're going to go into the story. Now, as this battle over the parking ticket is going on, it turns out that one of the women who is shingling the roof, she slips and she falls, but she's able to grab onto the roof by her fingernails. So obviously she's in a great deal of distress, great deal of danger. She didn't have a harness on. I think a lot of those guys didn't have harnesses back then. And anyway, so as this is going on, we also see some of Sarah. She's still ranting though. And then we see Diane. She pulls a gun on the Super Sons here, because the Super Sons are like talking about going in and helping. Now, obviously, Officer Diane, she doesn't know the Super Sons and who they are, and this is something that Clark Jr., I should say, he definitely would be able to handle rather easily. But there's a big problem, is that one, there's a lot of witnesses there, and two, Officer Diane has her weapon drawn and pointed at Bruce Jr. So Clark is worried that if he goes in and he kind of attempts a rescue of this young woman, then Bruce Jr. might bite it here, because Diane is not fooling around. And because of this, Clark Jr. decides that he's just going to stay in place. The women, they rush, they get a ladder. I guess they got it from the fire department. They put the ladder up. They're rushing in. They're rushing up, I should say, to save the shingler, the roof shingler. However, just as they get there, the woman falls. And the would-be rescuers, they can't grab her in any way. So the woman falls, and she is no longer on the senses, shall we say. And Bruce Jr. and Clark Jr., they're kind of horrified by this. Because in their attitudes, they're like, hey, if you didn't stop us from saving her, we could have saved her. Of course, that would have required them to break into their outfits, which, by the way, I think are still in the van. So on one hand, the women had no idea, no reason to believe that these two regular guys, as they see them, would have been able to save this woman. But Clark still feels guilty because he knows he had the superpowers. He could have done something. The mayor is very cold about this, saying, "This is very sad, but cannot be helped. Sister Jane knew that in doing man's work, she ran the same risk." So the mayor's being cold here, saying, listen, we're taking on the roles of men, but we're prepared to pay the consequences for that. That means, Officer Diane, if she has to take a bullet, she will take that bullet. And we see Bruce Jr. here. He's very offended, saying, why, you cold-blooded witch, you and big Sister Sybil and this whole weirdo town belongs in a freak show. Touch you? I had to slap some sense into your pretty faces. So, even when he's admonishing these women, he still can't help leering at them sexually. And again, we're seeing the mention of big Sister Sybil. And I think they're kind of Hanley's implying that these women are in a cult. And this is only a few years after Charles Manson and the Manson girls. And his cult are mostly women. So I think that sort of was in the consciousness of a lot of people back then. So anyway, there's still that one problem, is that the women actually don't want to touch these guys, because that's a very strict edict by the cult leader, Big Sister Sybil, that they can't touch a man. So what happens is that a woman who is she is operating a bulldozer, and she scoops up the Super Sons, and the women are congratulating themselves here, and then it turns out that there's actually a chute that will open up and will take the prisoners or whoever they're trying to detain, and drop them directly into the jail cell. So this is again, even Dukes of Hazzard didn't get this silly. So anyway, the two sons, they're scooped up and they're dropped into the jail cell in the town jail. And it turns out there's only men there. These are men who had made the error of entering into the town. They were detained. Apparently, what had happened is that it was clearly, they got caught the same way the Super Sons got caught, with phony traffic violation, and also says that they have no rights here, that some of the men, they feel trapped and lost there, and some of the men are actually taken out of their jail cells, and they're never returned. So, and the prisoner who's sharing this information with the Super Sons kind of is making it clear that he kind of has some information there, but he's making it clear that it looks very bad for these guys. And and the prisoner here is sharing that they feel like some of the prisoners were murdered when they were taken out, and that there's there's a leader called Sister Sybil, or Big Sister Sybil, and the guy's saying that basically whoever goes into the swamp never comes back. And the one thing that dominates the town, I should mention, is this large eye that's all over the place. So anyway, the Super Sons, they take this information and they talk about it amongst themselves. The other prisoners are asleep at this point. They're used to the routine. So it's just a matter of when for these guys. And Bruce is saying, listen, I kind of like women's lib, but these guys, they're taking it way too far. And it turns out that two of the officials, the mayor, Sarah, and the officer, Diana, they're talking amongst themselves in the office, which is adjacent to the jail cell. Now, obviously, normally no one would be able to hear this conversation. However, Clark Jr. does possess super hearing. Not as good as Daddy's, but nevertheless, it's good enough for this story. So he's able to overhear what the two women are talking about. And apparently what had happened is that the very uninspiring words of Clark Jr. and Bruce Jr., apparently it moved these women. And it moved these women to the point where they're questioning their loyalty to Big Sister Sybil here. Because they're thinking, in between all the babes and the honeys and wah, 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 in between all those comments, somehow these two women found wisdom in the words of Clark Jr. and Bruce Jr., which is, it makes extremely questionable judgment from these two women, but nevertheless, they are questioning what they're doing. And apparently, again, this is like cults. There are people in cults who have doubts, but the cult is designed to sort of comfort those doubts. But one of the things that we do find out is Sister Sybil is sort of a somewhat absentee cult leader, because she can't show up in town. So anyway, as the two women are talking, the mayor, I think, she says, "Listen, we'll talk to Big Sister Sybil, one-on-one. We're going to go out to the swamp because we're going to have a funeral for Jane. Jane was the woman who was shingling the roof, and she was the one who fell and passed away. So the town is going to have a huge send-off for Jane. They're going to go into the swamp. They're going to talk to Big Sister Sybil. So so right now right now the girls are still on board with Big Sister Sybil. They're having a few doubts, and I guess they kind of want to go to her for some reinforcements. That's what it sounds like. But because of this is a big moment for Clark Jr. and Bruce Jr. to sort of find out really what's going on. Because they've heard of Big Sister Sybil, but they haven't actually seen her. So this gives them an opportunity to actually confront the cult leader of this town. Now, conveniently, the other prisoners are escaping, so this means that these two can escape. Although they do plan on coming back. They want to do this very quietly, but nevertheless, they also want to attend that funeral and see what's going on in the town. It looks like Clark Jr. is doing most of the heavy work, which is understandable given he's the one with the superpowers. It looks like he's digging through this this doorway. And After he gets kind of a good grip, he rips the hatch off. There was a hatch that was in the prison. I think that was the chute they went in and out. Now the thing is, the two super sons, they don't want anyone to know that they're gone. So they repaired the damage that they did to the jailhouse in escaping. This way, no one will get suspicious that they had are nothing more than just a couple of schmucks who kind of just wandered into their murder machine. So anyway, the guys here, they're still somewhat they're displaying some of their kind of women's lib, their feelings, saying that, listen, it's fine for chicks to be somewhat independent, but when they're too much and they're too far in this women's lib thing, it just kind of like makes me feel icky. When I'm like sexually harassing police officers and mayors just because they're women, I feel icky if I can't do it. So anyway, the Super Sons, they finally show up in costume here. Apparently no one had checked their Mystery Machine van. So they were able to have their costumes available to them. And then we see the funeral, or at least the procession for Jane here. And this is a big procession here. They have Jane, she's laid out, she's not in a coffin. She's apparently on I guess a kayak here. And there are flaming torches, and every woman, I think just about every woman in town, they're carrying their pallbearers for Jane here. Again, it is a kayak because they're crossing this kind of this swampland here. And we see the Super Sons, they're following this funeral procession, which, I mean, this is like Yondu level funeral. But we see Superman Jr., he's swimming in the swamp. Meanwhile, he's holding Batman Jr. in his palm, as if like his palm was a chair. And man, and Batman Jr. is like letting his cape, kind of like straddle along in the swamp. That makes no sense. Because nothing else, because Superman Jr. is holding him up here as he's swimming. So goddamn, why let the bottom of your cape get ruined? And also, God, if Batman Jr. takes a fart, whew, Superman Jr. is going to be looking at that hand for days. So anyway, as the funeral procession is going on, I will take a look at a Twinkies ad. And we see a Twinkies ad. This one has Shazam in it. I've never seen, I don't think I've seen this one before. And it's Minerva Menace. And it turns out Aunt Minerva, who is, I guess, the leading underworld female figure. So I guess was it Dr. Savannah in Shazam universe? That's the big villain, and Minerva is the female equivalent. And it turns out that Minerva has an idea, and she's kind of a little bit philosophy here, saying, listen, our children are the future, and for us to control the present, we'll control the kids. And then pretty soon we'll control everything because we control the kids. And the two henchmen are impressed. They say, well, we're gonna go after kids. Hey, go for a weak target. No criminal has ever thought about that. So anyway, Minerva is telling her two henchmen that she's going to use a mind control machine, and then she's going to broadcast herself on TV shows that kids watch. And I think this is kind of a dry run for it. So Minerva is broadcasting herself in front of her mind control machine. She's telling the kids, "You don't like Hostess Twinkies. You don't like Hostess Twinkies," and the kids are staring back at the TV or the idiot box, as it was called when I was a kid. "I don't like Hostess Twinkies. I don't like Hostess Twinkies." And for some reason, Billy Batson happens to be a prisoner of Minerva, and he's taken into the studio where Minerva is broadcasting her message. And Billy Batson's very upset. I figure probably Twinkies. Hey, Twinkies, they're a sponsor. I have to protect my sponsors. That's how I get paid. And I really have to worry about this corporation's profits. Hey, I got stock in Hostess. So he turns into Shazam, and Shazam just simply tells the kids, "Think for yourself again, kids." And the kids are like, the spell's broken. They love Hostess Twinkies. They can't believe that they had ever questioned their love of Hostess Twinkies. And Minerva apparently is not actually directly punished for this crime. She did commit a few crimes here. So they're just going to go right back to the drawing board. And the henchmen are questioning Minerva, saying you shouldn't have brought up Twinkies. And one of the other henchmen here is kind of rubbing it into Minerva, saying, yeah, Minerva, kids love Twinkies too much to be fooled. What a stupid thing you did. So anyway, yeah, that's it for this ad. The Shazam here kind of looks like, he kind of looks more like, which Shazam? John Davy, the one with the potbelly of steel. That's what he kind of looks like here. You can take a look at an in-house ad. It's for some of the super family comics, like the Superman family, the Batman family, the Super Team family. These were kind of, I think maybe you might have gotten one news story and then a bunch of reprints. DC at this time were trying to move their reprints into sort of these higher priced items, because these are giant sizes at 50 cents rather than the regular comic book, which is 25 cents at the time. There was still demand from DC fans to see a lot of the older stories, because it was really hard to get those comic books back then. And while they may not have constituted a large portion of their readership, the ones who did want to see these reprints, they were willing to pay that extra quarter to get it. So that's why these comics existed. I think at one point, DC wanted to cancel Detective Comics because of sales, but the thing is that Detective Comics was like literally their first comic, and they felt that from kind of a sentimental point of view, it would be bad to kind of cancel that comic, since that was their first one. So basically they took Batman Family, which was actually selling more, and they basically rolled it into Detective Comics. So it was Detective Comics, but it was Batman's Family. Superman's Family, that was an outgrowth of the spin-offs, the Superman spin-offs, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, were successful spin-offs. Those comics ran for 15 plus years, and they were still selling. It was very weird. I was kind of always wondering, like, who needed like the sidekick's point of view from a superhero story. And then we see one for the Super Team. These are various reprints. I remember buying this, and I remember buying the Batman one. And there's one for Tarzan. So anyway, I'm going to go back to the story. So we're in the Savannah Swamp here. We see a large monolith, which is similar to what would have been seen in like 2001, except this one has a huge, large eye centered. And apparently the monolith can communicate. So we see all the townswomen there. We see Jane's corpse, who is put in front of the monolith here. And the monolith is speaking, this is a funeral. So this is sort of a eulogy here. However, it's not necessarily a eulogy for Jane. It's really a reminder to the women that, hey, we're here for a mission. My mission, but nevertheless, you guys agreed to it. And we're still going through. Excuse me. However, the monolith also snitches out Sarah and Diane, the mayor and the officer. Apparently, when these two talked, Sarah and Diane, or Diana, they were talking in private, but apparently Big Sister Sybil overheard this conversation, and she's snitching these two out to the rest of the cult, saying, you got to keep your eyes on them. And the Big Sister Sybil is admonishing the two women for showing sympathy to the Super Sons. And she's ordering them, these two specifically, to murk the Super Sons as a display of loyalty to Sister Sybil. So this funeral really was sort of a way of Big Sybil, Sister Sybil, reinforcing her control, her dominance over these women here. So, and these two particular women are on the spot here. The Superman Jr., Batman Jr., the Super Sons, they hear this. And they're thinking, hey, it's a good thing we broke out. Because these guys are kind of slow to catch on. So when they were ready, when the women were probably going to be ready to murk them, Superman Jr. and Batman Jr. are still kind of figuring out exactly what's going on. Now, the women leave. I guess, they went with the kayak, so they came back with the kayak. But the two Super Sons, they stay. And when they're all alone, they both directly approach the monolith. And they want to see whether they can communicate or talk to the monolith here. The monolith obviously is aware of their presence. And so Batman Jr. calls out to the monolith saying, listen, we have some questions here. And the monolith is not intimidated or afraid of the Super Sons. In fact, the monolith actually does not recognize the costumes. So Big Sister Sybil, she notes that the men are costumed. She doesn't know the costumes themselves, and they point this out, two of them. And it's Batman Jr. who points out, hey, she didn't recognize us. After this adventure, we're gonna have to check our branding here, because hold it, we found an entity that doesn't recognize us. Then Batman Jr. wants to know why Sister Sybil, quote, turned these gullible girls against men. Again, that's some of that Bob Hanley sexism there, and because Batman Jr. has already judged these women as gullible. They hate men. Oh my God, they're under someone's control. Oh God, these gullible girls, they'll just believe anything. That's how guys like Bob Hanley thought. So anyway, the monolith is kind of, quote, enlightening the two of them, saying that, they have to strike out against all men until women are completely equal. There is no equality, and we're going to change that. And yeah, the kind of the monolith here is kind of gloating to the Super Sons, saying, "If you wonder why I remain hidden, it is because a leader who is familiar and seen by her followers losing authority. She must inspire loyalty by remoteness, even fear. But in a just cause, it can be excused." And again, um, Batman Jr. showing some of his sexism, saying, "Excused? You got to be kidding. You and those poor mixed up chicks are freaky. A menace to men and society in general. Because if you don't like men, there's something wrong with you." And then we see Superman Jr. He's trying to calm down Batman Jr. Batman Jr. is going on this incel rant here. Before I go back to the story, take a quick look at this in-house ad. There's actually two of them. One is for the Treasury editions. I've talked about these Treasury editions before. They just want kids to buy higher priced items. So there are a bunch of reprints here. The covers are really good, because I would have bought this based on these covers, and I might have been largely disappointed, because a lot of the stories were back in the Silver Age, and the artwork was a little less than, shall we say, acceptable to me back then. And there's another Superman limited Treasury edition. Superman was the big seller in comic books at this time, even though Spider-Man was selling a higher percentage of that comic. But nevertheless, Superman was still the big kahuna in terms of comic sales. I think back then, Superman would sell a little more than half the comics produced, whereas Spider-Man, I think Spider-Man was selling like 75% of the comics they produced. Okay, so here's another ad for the Treasuries. This is for the back order ones. Excuse me. It looks like the only only two non-superhero ones are Ghost, which is the horror anthology title, and Tales from the Bible. Okay, maybe there's a connection. It looks like Tales from the Bible. I believe most of the stories are from the Old Testament, and they may have thrown in like one or two New Testament things. Looks like the Batman one sold out, which is nice. It's interesting. These things were not big sellers on the newsstand, although the newsstand dealers did eventually sell them down. But they would often sit on those shelves for a while. It's going to go back to the story. The Big Sister Sybil, the monolith, the eye shoots out a force field. And the force field entraps Batman in it. And this is obviously a great danger to Batman Jr., I should say. Because as the pressure increases, Batman Jr. will also be decreasing. And we know what happens when you take a billionaire, you put him in a kind of a pressurized situation, and you place him in an environment that has high pressure, kind of like the Titan submersible. So Batman Jr. he does not want to end up like those billionaires. He wants the easy life. And Clark Jr., he wants this too. Well, so they're friends. So he's able to at least counter the force beam by interrupting it with a punch here. And so this obviously broke up the stream that had captured Batman Jr. here. And we see Superman Jr., he's able to fly Batman Jr. out of danger here. The two are still in that general area, although they're up on a tree at this point. Batman Jr., he's feeling worse for the wear because he felt that. He felt that, and he's making it clear he felt that. And we see Superman Jr., he's saying, that force field could have killed you, crushed your bones, or choked off your breathing, just like the Titan submersible. And we hear hound dogs. The hound dogs are hounding. And it turns out that the women of town, they're on a search party to track down where the escaped prisoners are, because obviously when they went to the jail to bring out the Super Sons weren't there. So then, but the thing is, they have some of the Super Sons' clothing. So that's how they're able to kind of track them down, because that's the scent that the hound dogs are following. Now, this is something interesting here. The Super Sons, they're in the tree, and the women are on the ground. They're kind of like basically kind of zeroing in on where they are. And they notice that the hounds are using their clothing that they had left behind as, a way of tracking them, the scent. Now, Bruce is saying, listen, he's using our clothes with our scent. And Clark Jr. is saying, no, I don't have a scent. I don't leave a scent. They're following your scent, not my scent. Now, this does kind of work into the story. But this thing about, Superman Jr., Clark Jr. not having any smell. But, yeah, at this point, he's basically telling Bruce that he's the smelly one. But the hound dogs are able to find the tree that the Super Sons are in. So they're cornered at this point. And the women have their guns trained on the Super Sons here. At least they're trained up on the tree. And they're waiting for the order to shoot, because they're waiting for either the mayor or Officer Diane to give the order to fire. But it turns out neither one of them can't do it. Even though they told their cult leader that, yes, they're going to take these two guys off the census. Nevertheless, when the opportunity showed up, the two women couldn't do it. So they put down their arms. And it turns out the other women, they're much deeper in the cult. So they simply fire on the treetops here. So they're not actually they're not actually aiming at the Super Sons. They're just aiming in the area where the Super Sons are. The other women admonish the two women, Sarah and Diane. So they're on the outs at this point in terms of the cult. And we're told that this is the end of part 1. And it's a 2-part story. So this is kind of the low point in the story here. And then the second part, the Super Sons overcome their obstacles. Looking at some of the ads, nothing really interesting. So we're told this is part 2, the greatest hate. Feminists hating men, the greatest hate. Bob Hanley was just, I gotta teach these kids. I gotta teach these kids. So anyway, the bullets are flying, they're ricocheting up the tree. Not a problem here in that, Superman Jr. is Superman Jr. And he's flying both him and Batman Jr. out of the swamp. Again, they were not really seen. They heard them, they smelt them, at least the dog smelt them. But since they weren't really seen, they can kind of make this escape here. And none of the other women are they don't know exactly how they'll escape. But nevertheless, the two super bros, maybe I can call them that, they decide that they're going to switch costumes. Because again, the problem is that the dogs can identify the smells, and they can't escape the dogs. But the thing is that the dogs can only smell one of them, and that's Bruce, and not Clark. So the thinking is that if the two of them switch costumes, they might be able to kind of take advantage of kind of like throwing the enemy off base here. So that's what they're thinking. And I think what's going on is that since Superman Jr. will be wearing Batman Jr.'s outfit, the scent from that will kind of trigger the dogs into following him. So what's going on is that Superman Jr. dressed as Batman Jr. is going to be the decoy. So Batman Jr., who is dressed as Superman Jr., can do his detective work and figure out what's going on. Anyway, it turns out that Batman Jr., dressed as Superman Jr., arrives at the monolith. And he sees that Sarah and Diane are in front of the monolith, and they're awaiting their punishment. So it looks like the two women are basically mind controlled at this point. Now we find out that the monolith isn't fully solid. It's and there are ways of passing through the monolith. And we see that Sarah and Diane, they both walk through the monolith. Now, Bruce Jr., dressed as Superman Jr., he immediately bum rushes the monolith to follow where Sarah and Diane went. And again, he's able to do this because the monolith isn't fully physical. And also, as Batman Jr. dressed as Superman Jr., he's running a bluff on Big Sister Sybil that he is Superman Jr. And since that little ruckus they had earlier, we see that Batman Jr. is able to bluff the monolith and get entrance into it. And it turns out that the monolith kind of has these strange energies. So it looks like Batman Jr. dressed as Superman Jr. is going through kind of like this really deep LSD trip. And then he arrives in another part of the swamp. He recognizes this definitely is like Deliverance type stuff. And then Batman Jr., he is set upon by two very large, grotesque monsters. And both of them are attacking Batman Jr., and while Batman Jr. has Superman Jr.'s costume, he doesn't have Superman Jr.'s powers. So this is basically Batman Jr. running away from two monsters. And then what happens is that the Super Son he walks into quicksand here. And of course, the two monsters that are following him also go into the quicksand. And it turns out because the monsters obviously are much bigger, much larger, and they're moving about, they're going under the quicksand here. However, at the last moment, one of the monsters actually speaks. And the monster speaks, "I want to live." And then we see Batman Jr., he's very surprised by this because it's a voice he recognizes. And it's a voice he heard before. However, he can't really dwell on that at the moment because he's sinking in the quicksand too. As the two monsters went under. But then it turns out Superman Jr., who's dressed as Batman Jr., he arrives. And he's just hanging around saying, "Hey guy, how you doing?" Batman Jr., who's in the quicksand, Batman Jr., who is in the quicksand, he doesn't appreciate this because he doesn't have these superpowers. So once he goes under, he knows he's in a lot of trouble here. However, it turns out that the Superman Jr. costume that Batman Jr. is wearing has special properties. And one of the things is it doesn't get waterlogged. And because the outfit doesn't absorb moisture, it's not going to weigh Batman Jr. down much. So basically, he's kind of stuck in stasis. So Superman Jr. is saying, "Haha, because I have this extra knowledge, I know you're not really in danger. So I can kind of take my time, kind of laugh at you in your predicament." And I'm sure like Bruce Jr. doesn't appreciate this, saying, "Listen, hey, I might leave a few Hershey bars in your costume here, so get me out of here real fast." And Superman Jr., dressed as Batman Jr., he complies. So this is kind of why you see this strange little panel here. But then the two Super Sons, they switch back into their costumes, the ones they're comfortable with. They're checking maybe, hey, is there an extra skid mark here? But nevertheless, everything's fine, everything's good. And, they're dressing in front of each other, they're bros. And then suddenly out of the swamp comes, again, the sloth-like creature with the one eye and the tentacles, the one that we saw on the cover. And it turns out that Batman Jr. is retelling the story of his encounter with the two monsters. And then as they're confronted with this monster, Batman Jr., who is properly dressed at this point, that Superman Jr., this is the real Big Sister Sybil. And Big Sister Sybil, she goes along, gives this expository dialogue that you would expect from Bob Hanley, saying that she was born on another world. But the thing is that they kicked me off that world for being really ugly and being kind of evil. But I get a sense that me being really ugly was what made them want to kick me out. And because of this, because once again, in Bob Hanley's mind, if you're a woman and you're ugly and you're bitter toward men, you're just this unreasonable creature. And it turns out Sybil's plan was to slowly poison the women so that they themselves would turn into those beasts that were trying to hunt down Batman Jr. And it turned out that those particular poisons were in Sarah and Diane's bodies, but because they had entered the monolith, the energies of the monolith sped up the process. So the two monsters that Batman Jr. had faced, that was actually Sarah and Diane turned into hideous monsters, which again, if you attractive women, you get into feminists, they will turn you into a hideous monster. That's the message that Bob was sending. And it turned out that the voice that had called out that, I want to live, that was Diane's voice. So he had recognized that as Diane's voice. Apparently the process is irreversible. So both of those women would have been stuck in those bodies had they lived, but we saw that they were pulled down into the quicksand. And again, this is Bob's way of saying, don't let those feminists do that to you. Don't let those feminists do that to you. And I'm going to turn. Let's kind of take a quick look at this ad with the patches. Some of these patches are actually really nice. I remember having some of them. Okay. And I'm going to take a look at this in-house ad. The top one is for The Amazing World of DC. This gave the readers an opportunity to see kind of like what's going on in the DC office. Because DC had finally seen, how Marvel was able to kind of build up their readership by really letting their readers know what was going on in the offices. And this is kind of DC's attempt to explain the direction that they were going and so forth. This is apparently the 7th issue of The Amazing World of DC Comics. There's an interview with former Superman editor Mort Weisinger. Mort Weisinger was kind of known as one of the big bastards in comic books. He was the guy who mentored Jim Shooter. So if you heard negative stories about Jim Shooter learned probably a lot of that from Mort Weisinger. Apparently, Kurt Swan? No, not Kurt Swan. The Superman artist. What's his name? Oh yeah, Kurt Swan. Yeah, Kurt Swan. He apparently would leave work with headaches because of dealing with Mort Weisinger. Talking about Superman on the silver screen, kind of like this is close to the time where they were ready to do Superman in production. And some other news. And then DC's subscription service. They used this ad for a long time. So anyway, we go back to the story. It turns out there's some more banter going on. Apparently, Big Sister Sybil, she needed to keep the women isolated as her her poison was slowly working their way into the women's metabolism. But it turns out that a touch from a male will completely negate the effects. So this is why the women were so hostile toward any of the guys touching them. Because apparently one touch from a male, because that's how wonderful men were in Bob Hanley's eyes, was enough to cure any woman of any horrible disease. So a little hyperbole from me, but nevertheless, you get the idea of what's going on in Bob's mind. Batman Jr., he's asking the sister, why are you doing this? Okay, you got this plan, you can do it, but why are you doing it? And it turns out that Big Sister Sybil, she was exiled from her world, and because she can't stand looking at herself, she wants to turn other women into hideous monsters, so she doesn't feel alone in this torment, which is a really shitty thing to do. It's kind of like, it's kind of like crabs in the bucket, where one crab is about to climb out and another crab will just grab it and just pull it down. So this is sort of like her basic plan is kind of crabs in the bucket. And the super sons, they're not too sympathetic to Sybil's story. They're like, saying, listen, I feel really bad about myself. I really feel ugly. It kind of twisted me, and I can't really bear to look at myself. And Batman Jr. is like, hey, no kidding, gruesome. No kidding, gruesome. So, so yeah, they're not getting a sympathetic audience from these two. Okay, so Sister Sybil, she's rushing toward the Super Sons as Batman Jr. is insulting her. He's obviously expecting Superman Jr. to back him up here, with after that insult. Batman Jr. notices that Superman Jr. is gone. He doesn't know where he went. And Sybil's like saying, hey, he might have ran off like a little boy. And as the tentacle or limb of Big Sister Sybil is reaching Batman Jr., he uses a 2x4 to protect himself. But then Superman Jr. shows up, and he's actually holding up the monolith. And again, Superman Jr., he has the same powers as Superman, just doesn't have them to the same degree. But nevertheless, the monolith, which isn't fully physical, can be lifted by Superman Jr. He's in the air. He's going to dive bomb Big Sybil with it. And because of the properties, like they had seen the two women enter it, they had Batman Jr. of course was able to enter it. So Superman Jr. has the idea that he's just going to imprison Big Sister Sybil in the monolith. I don't know if that's necessarily the smartest thing to do, because that's her base of operation. You might have put her in a stronger position. But then the monolith is taken into space. And we see the monolith is at this point kind of like not a problem. It turns out there was a hunch by Superman Jr. where he said something like, my hunch was Sybil kept clear of the monolith because by re-entering it, it would trigger a return to her home planet. And there she goes. Okay. Bob had to wrap this up in one panel. He did it. This is nonsense. Apparently, the whole time, Sister Sybil wasn't actually in the monolith, although she was able to access the monolith. Sister Sybil, based on her appearance, was probably in the swamp. And Superman Jr. had this hunch where if I were able to imprison Sister Sybil in the monolith, that would automatically trigger a return to her homeworld, because it was her homeworld that had punished her, sort of like how Kal-El had punished General Zod by putting him and Ursula and the other guy, big guy, in the Phantom Zone in the first Superman movie. So it's kind of the same idea here. And again, this is similar to Kryptonian, I guess, culture. So I guess the planet that Sister Sybil came from, they are, it appears to be populated by humanoids, white humanoids, with a lot of nice hair, who are very young. They had found out what Sister Sybil had been doing on Earth, and they decided that they're going to punish her for that incident. And basically, she's going to be imprisoned in a room of mirrors. So the unescapable image of Sister Sybil, she'll never be able to escape. And she's horrified by this. And we go back to Earth, and then we see the Super Sons. They're actually explaining everything to the town's women. Apparently, I guess when the monolith left, maybe some influence that it had over the women was somehow broken. And it turns out the women are somewhat, they're kind of kept up to date about what their fate was going to be. And they were horrified. But then it turns out Bruce Jr. here tells the women, hey, don't worry. There is a way of curing this. There is a way of counteracting what's going on. And it's through the touch of a man. And that man wants to touch you on the lips. And all these beautiful women who had just hated men a while ago, they're kind of letting these kind of leery frat boys basically, kiss them. And this is going to be a fun, time. And this is Bob Hanley saying, "This is the world it ought to be. It ought to be like this." And Clark Jr. is going, "Oh, brother, walk, walk, walk." So they're going to tell us that there's going to be a Super Son story coming up. I'm not sure they ever did. I think this is the last of the original run. I'm not sure about it. Again, it was kind of a fun read. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the letters page from the world's finest fans. And the first letter is from Edwin from San Diego. And he feels that there should be more time spent with Superman and Batman actually training their sons, to take their place. Because, again, as I had mentioned, for the most part, the dads were pretty absentee here. And Edwin's kind of pointing out some of the contradictions in that Superman Jr. is basically Superman with half the power. And but he's pointing out that Batman Jr. actually has no real skills. Because the thing is, Batman and Batman Jr. are just kind of like, normal, adults, adult males. And the thing is, since Batman has no superpower to pass down to Batman Jr., Batman Jr. kind of has to develop his skills. So, Batman wasn't born with super detective skills. He had to work on that. And Edwin's pointing out that, hey, if you're not having Batman Jr. Being trained by Batman Sr., then how can he be a competent detective? So it's kind of like maybe asking a few more questions. And he's pointing out there's no way that he can be as skilled an acrobat as his dad, no matter how physically fit he is. And he points out that, Robin was actually in the circus for years, so he was sort of pre-trained to be a great, acrobatist. But, putting on the Batman costume doesn't mean you're going to be doing those somersaults. I think the editorial is saying basically that we feel like these sort of missions where they're learning things on their own are actually more instructional than, say, any formal training they would get from their dads. Okay, the next issue was talking about World's Finest, issue number 230. This person really liked it. And he's also pointing to the B stories, because sometimes in World's Finest, they would have a B story. It would either be Dead Man, the Super Sons, or actually he's talking more like showcasing in World's Finest. The Super Sons would have a full story usually, but Dead Man would usually be the B story, and Metamorpho would also be a B story. And this fan is making the case that you should give these characters their own title. And yeah, I mean, I think Metamorpho actually was a part of first issue specials. That was DC's like short-term, like, you know, showcase title. I think the one breakout was Warlord, and that was like I think it would mostly sell in the top 25, and it was Mike Grell's baby, and that was a really popular comic. That was sort of the one tryout hero DC had. It was sort of like a quiet undercover hit because it ran over 100 issues, but it was sort of like it had like that cult following. Another is talking about issue number 230, and they're also mentioning issue number 228, which the reader really liked, calling it a classic. And I think what happened was that Robin was on the cover, but Robin wasn't in the comic. He wasn't in the stories. But it turned out that another reader had wrote in saying the best thing about this comic was the Twinkies ad with Robin in it, Batman and Robin. And the editors are saying, "Oh yeah, the Robin was in the Twinkies ad, so he was in the comic." Okay, so. So that's it. Apparently someone had written a 4-page letter and they only put excerpts in it. But they were really impressed. This person sent in a 4-page letter. And here's an ad for Kung Fu and Karate. I remember this ad. You got a record with it too. And that's it. And that is my review of World's Finest Comics, issue number 233. And I hope to have more reviews up soon. Bye.